All right, Richie, I know this may not be something we're thinking about this year, like we were last year, booking trips to Charlotte, but it seems like in 2026 and beyond, the ACC may be changing up the way that they do conference championship weekend. Obviously, a lot has been discussed about college football playoff expansion. And so I'm going to run you through a couple of scenarios here and a couple of thoughts and see what you think on it. I texted you the FS or the ACC one earlier. I may hit you with some of the other ones too after we talk about the ACC's option. But the problem, in theory, is that college football expansion is coming. And so, how do you decide your representatives from each conference, and how do you keep teams interested in playing in conference championships? Lane Kiffin came out for the SEC and basically said, like, why would we even want to go play there? If we lose, we might be out of the thing. And Rhett Lashley kind of said the same thing, like, hey, we could just take a bye this week and we'd be in at 11-1. Why are we going to play this game? And so I do think that these conferences have an issue if they want to keep conference championship weekend a thing that they need to fix. They need to resolve. So the two ACC options, let's talk about both of them. One would be that the ACC's regular season champion, right? You win the most games in the regular season. You're the one seed in the ACC after tiebreakers, before, if no tiebreakers are needed right now, like whatever, right? Like SMU last year, you go undefeated in the conference. Nobody else is undefeated. You're in, right? You're the ACC champion by winning the regular season. And then 2 and 3, this year it would have been Clemson and Miami, would play for the spot in the playoff. Now, they wouldn't be crowned the ACC champions, even though they won on championship weekend, but they would get into the playoffs by winning that essentially the ACC championship would be a play-in game, and the between 2 and 3, number 1 would just go on. I'll tell you, I don't hate that. The other option, I do hate this one. 4 teams would play, 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3. That would take place on the last weekend of the regular season. I know already the alarm bells. What about rivalry weekend and stuff? Obviously, 4 ACC teams play 4 SEC teams. We'll talk about that in a minute. But 1 versus 4 on the last weekend of the regular season, 2 versus 3 on that same weekend, and then the winners would advance to play in the ACC championship game, and both of those teams advance to the playoff. Let's say 1 beats 4 and 2 beats 3, 1 versus 2 in Charlotte. Both winners move on, and that's how you crown your champion. I don't like that one as much. I don't like adding an extra game. I don't like the idea that a team could be 8-0 in conference and then lose to the 4 seed because maybe their quarterback gets hurt or something dumb, right? And you devalue the regular season by doing that. I like the first option better. I don't think there's any perfect options out there, but to add some intrigue, to keep teams interested in the regular season and moving on, I like the first option better. I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's what is being rumored right now. Get right back to the video, but first, I do want to give some love to BetUS. Make sure that you are betting with BetUS. Right now, college basketball is super hot, and they've got baseball stuff over there right now. Obviously, the Seminoles on fire to start the season. Make sure that you're betting with BetUS. YouTube150 is the code. You get 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125 on your next 2. All of that up to $2,000, whether you're betting on NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, college football, college basketball, whatever it is. BetUS has you covered. Make sure you're using YouTube 150 when you sign up.
Yeah, so it'll never happen just because there's too much money involved, unlike spring games. Just get rid of conference championship games. There's no point to them, in my opinion. If you were the best team throughout the season, then in that conference, then you are the conference champion. It's like I hate how college basketball, Florida State has 2 ACC conference champs where they did not win the regular season. And I value the 2020 regular season championship far more than either of those tournament champions. Because you get hot, you can win, 4 straight games, and okay, now you're the conference champs. You get to hang a banner. I think that's silly. I get that, this is going to be, a dynamic document, so to speak, where it's always changing. But I like the idea of if you won your regular season conference outright, you're the ones who should get in, and you should not guarantee a bid to whoever wins the conference championship game, because in theory, if obviously it was a 14 playoff, and when Alabama knocked off Georgia in 2023, everyone knew Georgia was one of the best 4 teams in the country, but because of politics, they couldn't put Texas in without Bama, and they wanted Bama in. It should have been Georgia and Florida State in there, in my opinion. And I'll die on that hill, but that's another thing for another day. the game is evolving, so it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I think the regular season champs, so kind of going opposite of college basketball, where the conference tourney champs are guaranteed that spot. I think the regular season conference champions of the Big Five or the Big Four conferences, and then the Group of Five team, they should be the ones guaranteed. And you couldn't do that with a Group of Five because you're lumping a bunch of teams together. So maybe the two highest ranked teams from those conferences play. I don't know. I'm sure they've talked about all these ideas before in different ones, and when you get enough people in a room, it's hard to be in agreement. It gets tricky. But yeah, I just think there's a better way to decide this without adding games specifically. I think the last thing you need to do is, okay, you're the one seed, and now you want me to play two more games just before the playoffs? Like that makes no sense to me. I do not like that recommendation at all. But I do think the regular season should be rewarded because it's been so diluted now with the expansion of the playoff, and simply in theory, we've had 7-5 ACC teams go to Charlotte and win. Does anybody want to see them in a playoff? I don't.
Right. Yeah. You do that 1-4 thing, and I'm telling you, there's going to be a year where, Florida State, think about the teams they play out of conference, right? They play Florida every year. They've got a bunch of big out of conference games coming up. They play Notre Dame every few years. I mean, there would be a year where Florida State could have, and I hate to make Florida State this team, but say Florida State's the 3 seed, right? They've lost 1 conference game and they've dropped, or maybe they've lost 2 conference games and they're the 4 seed, right? And they've lost 2 out of conference games. They dropped to a Georgia and a Florida, or the Georgia and Notre Dame, or whatever. And they're 8-4 and Clemson's 12-0. Already having beat Florida State one time. And then Florida State upsets them in the conference championship, and Clemson somehow left out. Like, could you imagine? I mean, just reverse the roles. Say it was Clemson losing to South Carolina and other, right? Like, could you imagine that? Like, that is, it completely devalues the regular season even more than we already have.
So that's in that scenario, Clemson would not be left out. They would absolutely get an at-large bid. But at the same time, Florida State, in the current state of the rules, would be hosting and be a top 4 seed, and Clemson would be like 6 or 7 going on the road.
So the problem with the at-large is Clemson would only get an at-large bid there if there were 16 teams. If we go to 14, they probably wouldn't, because when it's 14, it's going to be 4 SEC, 4 Big 12, 4 Big 10, 2 ACC, 2 Big 12. There's 10. Group of 5 team, there's 11. And if Notre Dame's ranked in the top 14, they're in. Like, that's the qualifier. Yeah. So in that scenario, if there's 16 teams, Clemson absolutely would be in. If there's 14, they get screwed. And then, what the SEC and Big Ten are discussing, just really quickly, the Big Ten is, kind of toying with the idea of 1 and 2 play, but they're both already in. And then 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5. And the winners of 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5 are in as well. That's not terrible. 1 and 2 are automatically in no matter who wins, by how much, whatever. They're the Big Ten's top 2 seeds. The SEC is considering that as well. But the SEC also has the idea of maybe doing 4 play-in games where number 1 plays 8, 2 plays 7, 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5. If I'm an SEC fan and I go undefeated in the SEC, which we all hated, I get it. But if you go undefeated in the SEC and then somehow you just have 1 bad game against the 8 seed and you somehow get left out, like, to me, that's the worst option out of all of them. It is like saying that 1 and 8 somehow have the same probability of maybe making the playoff, right? Like, this year it would have been Texas versus Ole Miss. And I know Ole Miss pissed down their leg a couple of times, but like, could you imagine going number 1 in the SEC and then having to play Ole Miss and if you lose that game, if Ole Miss is hot, you're out? Like, that's absurd. So, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff they need to fix with this sport, but how they fix this conference championship weekend, like you said, it should probably just go away and we should back the playoffs up some so that we're not having games on January 25th for national championships. But if you're going to keep it, they got a heck of a problem to figure out how to keep it, because I agree. I agree with you too. The regular season is more impressive than what happens in a one-off game, especially with conference realignment. So I don't know. It's a mess, but hopefully they can get it figured out.
Yeah, and that's just absurd, because I had not heard that yet, that they would have the SEC would eventually, have a game one versus 2, and they both know they're getting in regardless. That would look like a champ sports bowl, because who is going to play any player that means anything in a game like that? I just can't imagine what coaches would say. Like, so you're making me play a top five team in the country, and what you are telling us openly is a completely meaningless game just to get some TV dollars. Like, if I was a coach, I would say absolutely not. I'm like, I will forfeit this game because you already said I have a spot in the playoff.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think there's, and I don't think there's that, it used to mean something to win your conference championship. As much as we've devalued the regular season, I think we've devalued conference championships. Like, who cares right now that Oregon won the conference championship, right? Like, who cares right now that Georgia won their conference championship? Because they went to the playoffs and got smoked. Like, who cares? So, I don't know. I think we've devalued that. And so, do those get, like you just said, it's 1 versus 2, and I got some guys that are banged up because it's been a long season already anyway. Yeah, I'm just going to get ready for the playoffs, man. I want to win a national title. Like, I've got a roster that just went undefeated or one loss in the SEC or the Big Ten or even the ACC. I ain't going balls to the wall on this thing. And that's kind of why I like the ACC's option of like number 1 just gets a bye and 2 and 3 play for the second spot. I hate to give the ACC credit, but I actually kind of like that. Like, you earned it through winning all your ACC games or losing the least ACC games. Like, yeah, you're in, and then 2 and 3 you can play for the right to go. I don't hate that as much as I don't want to give the ACC credit.
Yeah, Jim Phillips. I mean, it might be a little too little, too late, but that's okay. I think that's probably the smartest way that every conference would go. Now, the more that we're talking about it, and I'm thinking about it, if you win your conference in a 12 or 8-game, some conferences 9-game football season, if you have the best record, I know there's unbalanced schedules, and that's going to happen. It doesn't matter. You'll have tiebreakers for teams that are both 7-2 or 8-1 or whatever it may be. But reward the team that had the best regular season, that showed up every single week. Yes, injuries happen. You fight through that. Florida State's 2023 team was far more hurt than anybody outside of the program will ever realize, and showed up every single week and found a way to win. They should have got in, and especially in this format, they would have gotten a bye. And imagine having upwards of 4 to 5 weeks for guys like Keon and Johnny and everyone else that was banged up to get healthy. And not only that, but getting Brock Glenn a full month of prep before heading into it, or whoever it may have been. It's just it doesn't make a lot of sense, and I think we're scrambling because college football has so much going on with NIL, realignment, playoff expansion, and it's hard to put too much focus on any one thing. So I understand it to some extent, but figure it out.
Yeah,
because the sport is losing fans.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it in the national championship at ratings. Like once it gets to late January, people have moved on when they're. I mean, you think about what did we play our last game on November 27th, 28th, somewhere in there. And the national championship was 2 months after that, right? I guess it was on the 20th. I mean, fans of teams have checked out. Like they're on to the next thing, right? We were all worried about the playoffs and stuff, or the NFL playoffs and stuff. So